2 weeks ago, we began a sermon series called When God Says. And we started, as I began to pray about and think about where God was leading us in this, it's easy when you look at a calendar as a pastor and you look at sermon schedules and things and you think, okay, Thanksgiving is coming and Christmas is coming, and you kind of know where the direction of your sermons will go as that happens, because you certainly can't avoid or change or avoid Christmas time. So we'll be direction there. But as we began to think about what would come next in our sermon series, I really began to pray, and this sermon came to my mind when God says no. And how do we cope with that, and how do we handle that? And that was a couple weeks ago we talked about that. Then last week we spent some time here with Karen Damon, who did a beautiful job sharing her story, and I pray that really inspired and challenged you. And today we're going to lead into another sermon called When God Says Wait, because that's another thing we struggle with. Not only do we struggle when we're told no. Nobody likes to hear no, unless it's in a context of no, you don't have that disease, or no, that didn't happen and it was going to be bad for you, or no, that you didn't get in the car accident. Those are okay things, but generally we don't like the word no from the time we're probably, little kid, baby age, to the time when we're older. So we don't always like when we say no, but when God says wait, we still struggle with that. And so what happens though when God says wait, the struggle we have is because we have to trust that something else is coming, and we're trusting God. And trust is hard for us, as I talked about a minute ago, because trust means two things. Number one, I have to wait. And number two, I have to turn over control to something or someone else. I have to turn over control to something or someone else. And so I'm going to ask Cassie if she'll help me illustrate something today. I've asked her to come up here. And I'm going to ask you, Cassie, if you would just stand right here and face the piano. And we're going to put this blindfold on you. Let's see if I can get it tied very well. And you have to tell me, let's see, no glasses, right? Okay. And you got to be honest with me. If you cannot, let's turn it that way a little bit. Oh, I'm going to ruin your makeup. Oh, my goodness. I'll fix it later. I promise you can't see, right? You absolutely cannot see. Okay, so you just got to stand there, and we're going to do something here that will illustrate trust for you, and it's going to be, she's really breathing hard because she doesn't know. I told her, I said, you just got to trust me. You don't know what I'm going to do. You don't know what's going to happen, but you just have to trust me in this situation, okay? So you're going to stand here, and you're going to give me both your hands. You're going to hold right here. I'm going to give you something to hold, okay? Don't worry, it's not slimy. It's not going to bite you. It's not anything like that. You're just going to hold this right here like this, okay? All right, now you stand right there. And now, here's something really, really crucial that you all need to help me with, okay? Read the screen. Stay there. Read the screen. Has everybody read the screen? Please do exactly what the screen tells you, or this whole illustration will go out the window and be ruined, okay? Please read the screen. All right, now Cassie, I'm going to have you just turn around, stay there. I'm going to untie this blindfold. Are you ready? Okay, on the count of three, I'm going to untie the blindfold and I'll get out of the way, okay? 1, 2, 3. All right. So we've been lying to Cassie all weekend. So, there you go. See, I had to have you be really quiet. Because I thought for sure we were going to bring him in the back row. And we thought, then somebody will say, oh, Connor, and completely ruin the whole thing. So, did you say yes or just take the ring? Okay, I didn't know. I thought maybe we missed something there. I wasn't quite sure if there was something. Well, yeah. Connor spent yesterday very stressed as he was sneaking around Yakima trying to get a hold of Mindy and Beto because he had to ask permission first, as a good gentleman would do. And so he was snooping all around, and while she was at work, we were lying to her. So anyway, we were very excited as a family. And so I'll tell you a funny little story. Cassie, and then I'll get into the sermon, I promise. But Cassie was in the office last week, and we were helping her make some copies for school, and she and Dustin and I were talking, and I said, Connor's been talking about getting a tattoo. What do you think about that idea? Because Navy guys, I guess that's one of the things you're supposed to do. I don't know. Anyway, and I said, what do you think about that? She goes, well, I'd rather have a ring. So, now I didn't tell him that because this has been planned longer than that, but we're very excited and very happy to welcome you to our family, Cassie, and it fits, so very cool. Very cool. So, now I didn't completely lie because we will talk about trust today because trust is an important part of what we're going to talk about today. Exodus 32, if you have a Bible, turn there. We're going to get there because it's an interesting story that I think you'll understand where we're going when God talks about us waiting. The problem I have with, now I got to preach and not be distracted by Cassie and Connor in the front row. The problem I have with waiting on God is that I don't wait well for most anything. I don't. I'm not the most patient person. I hate going down 16th and being in line, trying to get home at like 4 in the afternoon I get to Tieton. The light from you-know-where, the worst light in the whole city, 16th and Tieton, and you sit, and you know what frosts me more than anything? When I'm in line about 4 cars back and the light is green and no one moves. It's green! Would you just get out? Oh, I'm so mad. And my wife is the classic defender of the other driver. She always defends the other driver when I yell at the other driver. And I say, it doesn't matter. Just let me yell at them because they can't hear me and it makes me feel better. But it's green. Would you just please go? Green means go. Pedal on the right. Let's go. And I don't wait very well, and I get very impatient, and I'm not really good at it. I'm always anxiously anticipating the next event or the next holiday or the next thing to come up in church life or personal life. This little thing here has been, or this major thing here in our family's life has been something we've been anxiously anticipating. Getting Connor home for a little bit of leave has been anxious for us. We've been excited about that. So we get excited about those things. I enjoy counting down days to things. When we went to Disney World a few months ago, early in the spring, Sonia had a countdown. I made her in her office, and we count down to vacations, and Christmas is right on our heels. In fact, by the way, there's only 71 days, Treva, 71 days until Christmas, until you can put all the Christmas store stuff away at Kohl's. But in general, I don't wait well, I don't sit well. I even often tell Sonia, boy, I can't wait for the weekend when we have nothing going on. We can just stay home and relax. And then the weekend comes, and I stay home, and she'll find me like puttering around the house. She goes, what are you doing? I'm bored, looking for something to do. Unless the Ducks are playing and they're beating the Huskies, that makes a good day. But in general, I don't wait well. And there have been times in my life as a person or a parent or a pastor when not waiting or lack of waiting has gotten me in trouble or at least caused some difficulty in our lives. I've gotten better now. And I more easily recognize that voice of the Holy Spirit when he says no, or don't, or wait, or stop. Because I tend to get ahead of him, the whole adage of I get the cart before the horse kind of a thing, or the horse before the cart kind of a thing, and I get in a rush and in a hurry, and I don't wait well. And I know I'm not alone. Many of you are like me, and our lack of waiting is either because we eagerly anticipate something exciting that's coming, like for me, Christmas, or Connor coming home, or this moment in our lives. Those kind of things are exciting where we just can't wait. Or it's because we're just ready to avoid the inevitable situation. Just rip the Band-Aid off and let's get it done and get it over with. Why are we putting off what we know is going to happen anyway? Good, bad, or ugly, let's just do it. And so we struggle there. Or we just get bored and we get restless and we get tired of waiting, so we just got to do something. We've got to do something, so let's just go, let's do, let's be, let's act, let's move, let's change, let's fix, let's something. Today we're going to look at 2 aspects, or 2 thoughts when God says wait. First, we're going to see an example of trouble that comes when we don't. And I bet if I asked you, have there been a time in your life when you would say, I didn't wait when I knew God wanted me to, and I stepped out and did something, or I reacted to something, or I changed something, and it didn't go so well? Most of our hands would raise. In one way or another, relationship-wise, job-wise, marriage-wise, parenting-wise, financially-wise, whatever it might have been, we blew it, we messed up, we caused some trouble because we didn't wait. But then there's another side of that coin, and we're going to talk about the promises that God gives us when we do wait. In other words, today, we're going to look at the pitfalls and the promises of when God says wait. And so if you have your Bibles this morning, we're in Exodus chapter 32. And we're going to pick up a little bit of the story of the Israelites, who, if you've read much of the Israelites, the story of them, God's chosen people, the Jewish people he said were going to be the people to carry his message of redemption and holiness and following him, they were the people that he chose. But if you read much of the story of the Israelites, they would do really well, and they're not unlike us. We can be armchair Israelites and say, you guys, get your head together, come on. When you read their story over a long period of time, you see this life of, boy, they're really serving God and things are going well, especially when they had a godly king. And then they'd tank and they'd do something stupid like we're going to read today. And then they'd be in a mess and then they go, oh, woe is us. Oh, Lord, life is so hard. Life is so terrible. What they forgot to tell God, and he already knew, was that because we made such a mess, they left that part out. Please save us, save us, save us, save us, because we didn't wait and we made such a mess. So then God would help them, and then they'd do well again, and they'd serve him again. And this roller coaster of life with the Israelites is all throughout the whole Old Testament. And this story we're going to read today, you may recall that the Israelites were traveling out in the desert after having been rescued when Moses went into Egypt and told Pharaoh, let my people go. And so you saw the movie with Charlton Heston, or you saw the cartoon, and when that came out that Disney made, or whatever story you read, or you read the story in the Bible, or you remember it from Sunday school, and he went in and he said, let my people go, and so they did, and this is after the Red Sea moment where they crossed the Red Sea. Now they're out in the wilderness, what we call Exodus. And you would find, if you backed up to Exodus 24, what was going on was that they were traveling along, and God had stopped them. Stay in 32, I'll just give you a brief picture of where we're at. It's kind of a, meanwhile, back at the ranch kind of a story. Exodus 24, they've stopped traveling, and Moses had built an altar to God. And he said, come talk to me, Moses, and I'm going to give you some instructions about life and how to live life as an Israelite, worshiping, honoring, following God. And so he began to give them those instructions. Ways they should sacrifice, how often they should worship, what things they should do. All these things began to unfold and began to happen that God was telling Moses what to do, including things like how to build the tabernacle. That was the place where they would house the presence of God when they would worship him, and they would carry that from place to place throughout the deserts. How to build the Ark of the Covenant, which would literally house the presence of God in a form. That same Ark of the Covenant that you read about or you watched on Indiana Jones, that same kind of a thing. All kinds of instructions. And eventually, God invites Moses to come up on the mountain with him. Come on up here. Let's have another chat. And we're going to talk about some things. I'm going to give you some more specific instructions. And so Moses tells the Israelite leaders, stay here and wait, and then I will come back and give you some instructions. I'll come back and we'll continue on with life. Stay here and wait. And while they're up there, or while Moses is there, he's getting all these instructions, and he's finding out all these things, all sorts of things that God wanted them to do, including what would eventually be the 10 Commandments would be coming. Now, meanwhile, the Israelites are camped out, and they're waiting. And do you ever remember those times in life when your mom said, just wait here, I'll be back in a minute? I was raised in the 80s, and that's when you could leave kids in cars and not get arrested for it. And so my mother was famous, and my dad was even worse. If they went into Safeway together, we're just going to go in and get some hamburger meat and some tomatoes, we'll be right back. 45 minutes later, my sister and I are still in the car waiting. And they'd come out, and they'd have half a dozen bags of groceries, and they'd say, oh, we ran into so-and-so, and we talked to so-and-so, and we found so-and-so, and they've had 4 conversations while we're in the car waiting. And every parent's done this, and I've done this with my kids. There was a time when my wife wouldn't let me go in the bank in Harrington because she'd sit out in the car, and I'd go in and talk to all the bank ladies and be in there for half an hour while she's waiting in the car. So here's Moses. He's up on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments, tablets, most important thing they had received from instruction from God, one of the most important things to that point. And the Israelites are waiting. They're camped out, and they're waiting. And not waiting well. Waiting for Moses to return and continue to lead them. Waiting to see what God was going to tell them to do or what he was going to do for them. Waiting for someone to do something, and they're waiting and waiting and waiting. Can you relate to that? Have you been in that situation before where you feel like you're waiting forever? And so here we find them, and they eventually get tired of waiting on God. And they're sick and tired of waiting for Moses to get back down here so they could go. And so we're going to pick up this story, and things begin to deteriorate in chapter 32, and we're going to see how quickly their reliance and dependence on God evaporates. Beginning in verse 1, chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, one of the Israelite leaders, and said, come, make us gods, little g, small gods, other gods, not make us like God, not bring God to us, but make us gods, some other form of something that we can worship. Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the..." Now Aaron, I don't know what he was thinking either, because he should have stopped and said, "Knock it off." But he didn't. Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off the earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Really? When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and made themselves an idol, cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." Wow. I don't know what they were thinking. The Message reads it this way: "When the people realized that Moses was taking forever in coming down off the mountain, they rallied around Aaron and said, 'Do something. Make gods for us who will lead us. That Moses, that man out of Egypt, who knows what happened to him?'" How quickly. For years and years and years, they pleaded and begged and cried out to God, "Save us from this slavery. Get us out of Egypt. Please send somebody to rescue us. We're making bricks without straw in here. It's gotten pretty rough. Somebody do something. Lord, please hear our cry. Lord, please hear our plea." So he sends Moses down there. He rescues them after a whole bunch of plagues, gets them out of there, divides the Red Sea, marches them across, swallows up the Pharaoh's army, and then they say, "I don't know what happened to him. Let's find some other god to worship." You ever feel like God is taking forever? Can you imagine poor Moses? They're out in the desert 40 years. He has to hear. Are we there yet? For 40 years, he has to listen to the Israelites saying, "Where are we going? Didn't we go past that bush last week? Are we there yet?" Whenever I feel like God is taking forever, and I begin to act on my own rather than waiting on God to do what God is going to do, things don't go well. Or at least if they don't completely unravel into disaster, I do usually find myself having to backtrack and reset some things and go, "Okay, God, sorry, let's start over." For 6 years, we pastored in our first church in White Salmon, and for 6 of those years, I was a full-time employee of J&L Hardware and Home, or Home and Hardware, or Hardware and Farm. I don't remember what we called it. And a couple years after that, I did property maintenance for a management company that managed about 200 rental homes in the Columbia Gorge area. At the same time of doing all that full-time, we pastored a church, which is a full-time gig, and I'm a parent and a father and a husband and a man of God trying to do my life as a family man. For 6 years, that got really tiring and really old, and I prayed and prayed and prayed. And for the first few years, it was fine because you're not only young enough to have the energy to still do that, but you hadn't gotten exhausted yet. But after 2 or 3 years in, we began to pray and say, "Lord, I don't know if I can keep up this pace." I recognized pretty readily that all of these 3 major areas of life need my attention and my energy and my focus, and all 3 of them are not getting equal share. Whether they should be equal or not is a whole other story, but I really wasn't cutting it very well as a father and a husband, as a man of God, as a pastor, and as an employee. Just strung out and kind of burned out, wrung out too far. And I prayed and I pleaded and I begged God, "Please give me a different church that I can work just full time and all I have to do is be the pastor." Because boy, that's all that's easier. And so we prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for 6 years. Nothing was happening. God was taking forever. So 6 years in, we resigned. Signed a 1-year lease on a different home in White Salmon. Planned to stay in White Salmon so the kids could stay in school there. Kept working for the lumberyard where I was at the time before I moved on to the property management company. Because God wasn't doing anything about it, and he was not releasing us, and every place we had placed our resume for a different church where I could work full-time and not have to do all this extra stuff, Nothing was opening up. 6 years in. We resigned, we moved out of the parsonage and moved into our home with a 1-year lease. About 2 weeks later, I called my district superintendent and said, have you ever had a pastor unresign a church? We knew right away that was not what God had wanted us to do. We knew right away that we had jumped God's gun. We had gotten ahead of him and moved when he said wait. We had run when he said don't. And so, fortunately, we had a gracious church who loved us, and we went back, and they said, absolutely, we never wanted you to resign in the first place, and so we went back. Because of some choices we made, we had to stay. The consequence was we had to stay in that house and keep paying rent, which was a challenge for 1 year until we moved back into the church house. But God had never stopped hearing my prayer. 3 years later, he released us, and we moved on to Harrington, where I was full-time there. The point was that our plan and our timing was not God's plan and God's timing. And God he was a gentleman. He's going to let you do your thing. He will let you jump off the cliff, even though everybody else that's gone before you, it's not gone so well for them. He will let you do what you're going to do, even though it's not his thing and his plan and his schedule. And we're not alone. We've all done something like this, whether it's been in a job situation or family. Jumped ahead of God and tried to restore a relationship that wasn't yet ready to be restored. Left a job before God had a different one ready for us, or before he was done using us in the job he had placed us in. Made a purchase out of want, or at least self-created need, and gone out and purchased something when we knew we didn't have the finances and God had said it wasn't time yet. And I'm not talking about Cinnabon or donuts at Krispy Kreme. I'm talking about big stuff, big things that affect the entire dynamic of your financial picture in your life and your family. But we prayed and we waited, at least a little bit. God wasn't doing anything, so somebody needed to do something. Right? Have you been in? Am I the only one in the room that's done this? You may remember that in our sermon, when God says no sermon, we discovered that it's just because God says no, it doesn't mean that he can't. In other words, his no is never because he can't, but because he knows that what we are asking for isn't his best for us, and so he says no. And so in this case, when God says wait, it isn't because he isn't acting or doing something. That's part of the reason we get restless. When God says, hold on, just wait on me. Wait for me to do it. Wait for me to lead it. Wait for me to answer it. And it isn't because he's up there distracted or he forgot or he isn't doing something. With the Israelites, they were waiting. And it wasn't because God was sitting up there just twiddling his thumbs, hanging out with Moses playing backgammon. They were actually discussing something rather important for the Israelites to know. If we really believe this famous verse we throw out there and say, this is one of my favorite life verses, Jeremiah 29:11, in which God tells us that he has a plan and a purpose to prosper and not harm us, to give us a hope and a future, then why do we not wait for that? Instead, we go ahead with our own plan and our own purpose and our own future and our own hope is placed elsewhere from God. We don't wait well because it breeds uncertainty for us and frustration and not being in control. And that breeds restlessness and anxiety and an itch to just do something, and so we jump. So we run. So we leave. So we move. Before God is done doing what God had planned to do all along. We circumvent what he's already got going on. Can I encourage you with my own words that I need to hear because I'm preaching straight to the mirror on a lot of issues regarding waiting? Try not to get restless and impatient. Someone once said, well, the grass is greener on the other side because it's over the septic tank. Let that sink in for a second. Everything looks better somewhere else when where you're at right now is not pleasant. The job, the relationship, the whatever. It isn't always better. Now, sometimes, yes, God does lead us to greener pastures and blesses us with favor and blesses us with things. But God has us waiting because his timing is much better and more accurate than ours. All we can see is tunnel vision, what's going on in life right now, and I don't like it. But God sees this big timeline and says, if you just hang on, just wait for me, I promise you I've got the best time scheduled for you. I've got the best plan laid out for you if you just wait. I love the story of Joseph of the Old Testament. We don't have time to read the entire story. It's actually many chapters in the Old Testament. We're talking Joseph, the Joseph, coat of many colors Joseph. his father's favorites, the baby of the bunch. Joseph's father gave him that coat, and then he told his brothers that, hey, guess what, guys? You're going to bow down and worship me. Not only once, but he told them twice, saw it in a dream, had a vision. And they didn't like that very well. And so their response to that was, oh, fine, you think so, huh? I don't think so, little runt. We're going to throw you in a hole, spread some goat blood around, and act like you got mauled by a monster, tell Dad you died, and leave you. Well, instead, they felt guilty about that. One of the brothers says, no, I don't like that. Sold him into slavery. 17 years old was when he told him his dream. You would bow down and worship me. It was 14 years before that would come to be. 14 years later, at age 30, when he was in Egypt, through a series of events of being accused of adultery, being accused of all kinds of things, being thrown in prison, all kinds of terrible things continued to torment Joseph's life. And at any moment, if any of us were like Joseph, we might have said, you know what, God, I didn't sign up for this. I am out. But he didn't. He kept trusting God. Even when a friend of his said, hey, don't worry, when I get out of prison, I'll tell them how a great guy you are and we'll get you out. That didn't work out. Finally, 14 years after he saw this vision and had this dream, he found himself in Egypt in the favor of the government leaders there, who put him in a place where he would be in charge of overseeing the distribution of food during a famine. And lo and behold, would you guess who showed up? His brothers. And his brothers had to come to this guy they didn't know was Joseph and ask him for food for their family. And it's a whole incredible story, not only of waiting, but how this meeting unraveled and how Joseph reconnected with his brothers. And they had to come to him and ask him, who was in authority over them, remember that story? Authority over them for food to distribute to their families during this major famine. It was 14 years. 13 years. 13 years before God honored that promise. Just because God says wait or not yet, and he seems to be taking forever, that never nullifies his promise. He doesn't forget what he told you he would do. We forget, or we get anxious and restless and go, it's been long enough, God. I'm not waiting any longer. Just because God says wait or not yet, and he seems to be taking forever, are you coming back sometime today, God? Because I've got things to do and places to go and people to see. That never nullifies his promise. God knows that his plans and his promises are the best plans and promises. And his plans and his promises lead us to his best for him and his best for us. In Acts chapter 1, Jesus instructed the followers of Jesus, his own followers, to wait. Remember these instructions? Before he ascended into heaven, he said, go in the room and wait for the promise that my Father will send you. What he was talking about was his presence, the Holy Spirit, to be with them as they carried on his message into the world. Wait. Don't do this on your own. Don't jump and try to go out on your own and leave before God shows up. Before his presence gets there, before what he promised to give you arrives. Don't run and leave just yet. Because he knew a couple things would happen. One, they'd do it under their own power and they'd finally just wear out. And number two, they wouldn't do it God's way, they'd do it their own way, their own selfish way. So they waited. And this famous event happened where God showed up in a huge dramatic way and the Holy Spirit arrived on the scene and thousands of people were saved that day because they waited. The other important thing to remember when you're waiting is that regardless of what you're waiting for or why you're waiting, God has not forgotten you. We may feel like that, but he has not forgotten you. And the pressures of life will push you to want to make a decision or to do something because I can't wait any longer. God has not forgotten you. He has not somehow shelved your prayer that you gave him years ago or days ago and forgotten about it. He has heard you. And just because he seems to be taking forever, that doesn't nullify his promise to you. And no, it's not easy. Waiting and being patient is not easy in this instant gratification world that we live in, where things happen now this fast and I get an answer to the question I just asked 3 seconds ago. We sit at home as a family. And the funny thing about this, we sit there and we'll be watching television or a program. We'll say, did that guy die, that actor, James Garner or whoever it was, or didn't she, what movie is she in? Where was she at? okay, Google, and we ask it, and instantly we have an answer. We're in a world like that, where not only can we ask a question and get an answer, we can have a request, and we get that thing given to us. Quickly, instantly, have it your way. Do it now. Get it now. And we're in that mindset sometimes when we're dealing with God, and God says, I don't play that way. You're going to wait for me, or it will not go so well for you. Waiting is hard, especially when the waiting affects a relationship or our families or our children or our health. Someone we love. Hard to wait. And it's even emotionally and mentally and spiritually and even sometimes physically exhausting. And so God talks about that. And he gives us tons of promises to remind us that if you wait for me, it will go so much better. If you wait and do what I will tell you to do, or where I go, where I will lead you to go, you will be blessed. You will be at peace. You'll be strengthened. You'll have my best for you. In the back of your bulletin, there's a list of verses, looks like this on the screen. Every one of those verses, I don't have time to go through all of them, but I gave them to you because some of you, if not all of us, need to be encouraged because we're waiting on something. I don't know what it is in your life. You're waiting for the doctor to call. You're waiting for your marriage to be healed. You're waiting for the job to come through. You're waiting for your health to change. You're waiting for your kids to come home. You're waiting for your kids to finally serve Jesus. You're waiting for whatever it is in your life. And every one of these verses that I encourage you to take sometime this week or today, and begin to read these. And let these talk to you and speak to you, because this is God's verbal word given to man, written down for us to hear. Where he said to us, wait. Just wait. And when I read these words, I'm reminded of two things. Number one, God has the best answer. And number two, God has encouragement for me when I'm waiting. You're not waiting alone. In the book of Lamentations, we find some of God's promise. Most scholars believe that Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, wrote Lamentations as an outcry or a pouring out of his soul and his heart when he's looking back at Israel and the destruction that had happened and all the struggle and all the mess they'd made of life. And so Lamentations is this book that they believe Jeremiah wrote. We don't have real clear instruction about that, but we think so. Where he just poured out his heart to God. Said, Lord, I'm just overwhelmed by the state that Israel is in. In Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22 to 26, he wrote this. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions, they never fail. They are new every morning, great is your faithfulness. Some of you are singing it. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good to wait quietly for God to come through for you. Can I paraphrase it that way? It's not easy to wait. Especially when all around you, all you see is struggle and darkness and even failure, and maybe even failure you've been a part of or you've caused or you've had a hand in. It's hard to wait. And you're pleading with God to either fix it or reverse it or release you or do something about it. And God says, wait. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, Jeremiah wrote. And God says, do you trust me? His compassions never fail. And God says, do you trust me? Great is your faithfulness, Jeremiah writes. God says, do you trust me? The Lord is my portion, I will wait for him. Trust you, God. I like how the Message interprets verses 22 to 24. God's loyal love couldn't have run out. His merciful love couldn't have dried up. They're created new every morning. How great your faithfulness. I'm sticking with it, God. I say it over and over. He's all I've got left. It's also hard when you feel like I'm doing the right things, God. I'm following what your scriptures tell me. I'm being obedient and I'm being involved in my church. I'm reading my scriptures. I'm spending time in prayer. I'm being around people to encourage me. I'm doing my best to trust you and follow you and lead you. And look at that rotten crook over there who seems to have everything going so right. And here I am and everything's going so wrong. David wrote about that in Psalm 37. He spoke about that struggle. To wait in the midst of that circumstance. He said, do not fret because of those who are evil or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Trust, that's a big part of waiting, as you're trusting. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Just trust and wait for God. And it may be right now in your life, and I don't know what it is. We don't have time to ask every one of you, but all of us have a story where we're waiting for God to do something right now, waiting for him to deliver someone or to rescue someone or save you, and it's hard. Regardless of where you're at, it's not easy to wait. When I read this verse and I read about how God sees us in the midst of our struggle, patiently serving and faithfully following him, and we're waiting, this thought comes to my mind. God takes care of his own. God sees you waiting. God sees you trusting him. God sees you being faithful, and God takes care of his own. Again, the Message Bible interprets it this way, verse 7 only. Peterson writes, "Quiet down before God. Be prayerful before him." No, it's not easy to wait, and you'll even want to do something. I got to do something. But time after time, when I read God's promise and blessing comes when we just wait because we're trusting him. We're not waiting because we're indecisive. We're not waiting because we're fearful. We're not waiting because we don't know what to do. We're waiting because we're trusting God. And every time I read Scripture, all those verses in the back of your Bible and dozens more, where God's people waited on him, every single time God came through, and every single time God came through with his best for you and for me. In the meantime, we lean in hard to his strength and say, honestly, God, this is hard and I'm tired. We depend on his peace. We rely on his presence and say, God, I need you to calm my anxious and restless heart. Isaiah wrote about this exhaustion of waiting. He recognized that often we're tired. Tired from the routine, tired from the pressure, tired from living out this life that has so much for us to do, tired from trying to just purposely and honestly, holy living is tiring sometimes. So God gave him these words in Isaiah 40, 28 to 31. Do you not know? Maybe you need to hear this today. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what life has thrown at you, good, bad, or ugly. I don't know. Maybe these are the words God needs you to hear today. Do you not know, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. But those who hope in the Lord, those who wait on him, those who don't jump, those who don't run, those who wait. What are you waiting for? Have you stopped waiting? And have you started doing your own thing because you got restless or because pressure of life pushed you to it or because you just didn't know and couldn't sit still any longer or because God just seemed to be taking forever? You started to do your own thing and you stopped waiting for him. And you've been trying life your own way. How's that going for you and I? It doesn't go well. Like I said earlier, often when I do this, I have to reverse course, back up and say, okay, Lord, let's start again. I'll wait. Or maybe you've given up on God because he has been taking forever. I'm doing something. I am not going to wait any longer. Where do you and I need to stop? Reverse course and just wait. His way, his plan is always his best for you and for his kingdom. Do you trust him? Do you trust him enough to stop and say, all right, Lord, honestly before you, I'm itching to go. I'm restless to change. I'm anxious about a lot of things and I'm stressed out and I need your help. If you're like me and waiting is difficult for you in whatever circumstance of life you're in, and God is telling you to wait, then actually let's be honest with him about that and say, Lord, I don't like this. I'm having a hard time. Would you please calm my heart? Would you please give me peace about this situation? Would you please quiet my restlessness? Would you give me strength because I'm tired of waiting and it's exhausting not knowing? I like this quote to close. G. Campbell Morgan. He wrote, "Waiting for God is not laziness. Waiting for God is not going to sleep. Waiting for God is not the abandonment of effort. Waiting for God means, first, activity under command. Second, readiness for any new command that may come." So, I'm waiting for God first means I'll do whatever you tell me. Whatever you tell me to do, God, I'm ready to do. I'll do that. And then I'm ready for the next command that you tell me to do, God. That's step 2. And third, the hardest part, the ability to do nothing until the command is given. Are you ready to do nothing until God's command is given? Will you wait when God says wait? Let's pray. Lord, I think I can echo the voice of many in this congregation, including my own, when I would say that it's not easy waiting. We get restless and we struggle, Lord, and I need your help with that. For a variety of things that we bring before you, God, a variety of requests and things to ask and questions that we have and answers we need and interventions we're waiting on, God, it's hard to wait. Lord, I don't know what's going on among these people in this place here today, but many of them are waiting for something from you. First, Lord, I pray you give us the strength to trust you. And second, I pray you give us the peace to wait for you. And when we get that clear command to do whatever you tell us to do, we trust and believe and expect that it's only going to be your best. Would you lead us to that? Help us to wait for you, Lord. Give us the strength and the calmness and the peace to wait. And then expect the blessing that will come when your best comes for us.